Hey guys, my voice still bad, but next Friday it'll be better when I have surgery, I hope. But anyway, back here again at my little fireside hunting school. You know, I put out a lot of hunting schools for 25 years. I enjoy it. You know, I really enjoy, how you can tell. I enjoy teaching people who want to be better hunters how to be better hunters. And I worked hard over more than half of my life, quite a bit more than half of my life, to be able to find the kind of information that I can teach. And I often feel it was a thing that was given to me, a God-given thing. It was good for me, good for deer hunters, good for deer. And I really enjoy teaching what I've learned all these years. So, well, the last time I talked to you, I told you next time I was going to talk about whitetail feeding areas. And this is most hunters. You know, with all the schools I've taught, many thousands of hunters I've taught at schools, and probably millions via magazine articles and seminars in all these years. Most of them can't identify a whitetail feeding area. And that's kind of sad because, I'll tell you right now, the #1 best stand site is one that's adjacent to a whitetail feeding area. Well, there's a couple problems with it. I mean, that's not a one-time thing that makes or breaks your hunting season. Whitetails have a great number of places they can feed. In fact, they can feed almost anywhere. But they like what we would call a feeding area, or what they would consider a feeding area. It's to be big, with lots of the kind of the food they like to eat. So that when they get out there and start feeding, they can keep moving, zigzagging, side to side, into the wind. This kind of movement while they're moving into the wind makes it difficult for a predator to trail them without eventually being seen or heard, because they have, in order to stay with them, they're following from downwind. But every time the whitetail stops, or is with a whitetail with a group of other deer, one is almost always looking around and behind them. That's their job. And then finally one will flick his tail and raise his head and chew, and then the other one can put his head down and start feeding and turn. Well, the other one acts as a guard, or watching for predators and listening. Well, anyway, they like feeding areas to be sizable areas. And you know, whitetails in the morning, they'll get up from their beds around 4, well before sunrise, probably 2.5, 3 hours before sunrise. Most of the time, the whitetails in my study area in the morning, first thing they do when they get up, they'll empty their bowels and bladder. That's one of the signs of a bedding area, lots of droppings. And then they'll go to a place to drink water, get a nice big long drink of water, and then they'll head to the feeding area. And probably within, depending on how far away the feeding area they're at now, I keep saying that, where they are now, or another way I'll put it, their current favorite feeding area might be half hour away, you know, within a square mile area somewhere. And they're being cautious when they're going there. And they always approach from downwind. And older feeding areas will usually have a perimeter trail around them. You know, a new clear cut, a new farm field won't have a perimeter around it, but a new, if it's been there a while, and this has been a favorite of whitetails for, say, several years, 2, 3 years, not year round, or maybe only a couple weeks at a time, but if it's been a favorite, there's going to be a trail in the woods around the perimeter of it. And the reason that trail develops is because when the whitetails come from downwind, They don't just walk out in this area. Most whitetail feeding areas tend to be in openings. I'll explain more about that in a little bit, but it's open and they're out there. They can be seen out there great distance away because they're moving and they're up. When they're bedded, they're hard to see deliberately. So they're up and walking around. Well, and their heads are down, and when they chew, they crunch, crunch, crunch on grass or browse. And like at the beginning of this this presentation, you see it, you saw it going crunch, crunch, crunch. They're actually making noise when they chew, or when they're biting off browse, woody, thin little branches, tips of branches, or when they bite those off, there's a little sound, cracking noise. And anyway, there's lots of sounds in it. The sounds of their hoofs, and then moving through grasses, brush. Lots of sounds going on, which can kind of mask a carefully stalking wolf, or maybe a bear, or a coyote, or whatever, or a mountain lion. So whitetails have to be kind of careful, and they kind of like it to be a little open where they feed, because when they look back or look around, they want to look way over that way or way over that way. That's kind of important to them. Well, anyway, they're going to spend 4 hours out there, half of it in the dark, or maybe mostly in the dark if they're having problems with hunters. One of the reasons you don't see whitetails feeding so much in the evening because lots of the older and more experienced whitetails will wait till it gets dark before they start their feeding in the evening. Anyway, these are things to consider about feeding areas. So, like when I'm out scouting in the woods, and I'll be out there pretty soon, another couple of weeks I'm going to be scouting, during my spring scouting, looking for signs of older bucks that I'm going to hunt in the fall and where they're living. One of the signs I look for when I'm scouting is clusters of antler rubs. We've talked about that before. I see an antler rub, oh geez, there's another one. I think we better check that out. There could be several over there. And a lot of times that turns into an actual buck bedding area. Well, like that, I'm always looking for signs of a feeding area. Now, like I said before, it's important to know lots of signs of feeding areas, because during the course of a hunting season, whitetails can actually change where they feed every day because of hunters. No matter how skilled you think you are about getting to a stand site on the edge of a feeding area, for example, if you only have one and the wind direction is in the opposite direction the following day, they're going to get you via airborne scent moving to that stand site for several reasons. We'll talk about that. Or they're going to see you or find you. Eventually, the older deer especially, they're so skilled at finding and identifying hunters in the woods or around perimeters of feeding areas that you just can't keep that from happening very quickly. It's the reason why one stand site is terrible. If you're going to hunt feeding areas, you got to be prepared to move to downwind or crosswind feeding areas almost every day. Even if the wind doesn't change, inevitably, and a lot sooner than you would like. The biggest bucks in that area are going to find you probably within the first hour that you go to a new stand site adjacent to a feeding area. They'll certainly, if you're really good, maybe that stand site will give you 2 or 3 chances to hunt from the same stand site next to a feeding area. But for most hunters, that just isn't true. And that's why you never do as well as you'd like to when hunting adjacent to a feeding area, or put another kind of feeding area, a bait site. How about that? Well, okay. So I'm always looking for signs of feeding areas when I'm out there scouting. One of the signs when I'm walking through the woods where I hunt up northern Minnesota, wilderness area, lots of timber, is I'll look out there and gee, the sky is bright over here in this direction because it's kind of open. It's an area where sunlight reaches the ground. Well, for important feeding areas that are going to be most likely to be used by whitetails where I am, it's got to be fairly open in the area where they feed, because a lot of the foods that they like most have to have sunlight to flourish. Sunlight's got to reach the ground. They don't grow well in deep shade or amongst dense stands of timber, except for maybe a couple. Like, for example, oaks, like say white oak acorns, they usually start falling when you get first windy days in late August. And at that time, acorns drop from trees. It can be a really thick stand of oak trees. And at that time, whitetails will really key on new fallen acorns, because at that time, they're still fairly easy to chew. They'll spit out the shells, but they're still easy to chew. They like the green acorns, though they might be more bitter than the ones that have been laying there for a long time on the ground and have dried out. But they're easier to chew. And just about any kind of acorn. I remember when I was doing some work down in South Carolina, one of the very favorite acorns of the whitetails there were in a little bush. And the bush was only about 4 feet high and 4 feet in depth, and was covered with these little teeny black acorns. And boy, the whitetails, when those things were black and starting to fall off bushes, they could pick them off bushes themselves. They just keyed on those bushes like crazy. And so the place you want to hunt, if you're a bull hunter, in late October or early September, is wherever those little black acorns were growing down there. Anyway, like I was saying, the feeding areas used by whitetails during the hunting season change a lot and often daily. So you're looking for certain signs. When you're out just scouting, you want to find as many feeding areas as you can. And sometimes it isn't easy. There was a feeding area in my hunting area that I walked through many times while scouting, hunting season, and I never realized it was an important feeding area. Once I did, we started making hay there. Boy, we got some dandy bucks in that area. My son John took a couple of deer there. My daughter Katie got a nice big 10-pointer there. This was a really, really good place to hunt. And the only thing that made it obvious, finally one day, I saw a great big antler on a 6-inch diameter tree out there in this area. And so I went over to look at it, and I was saying, boy, a nice buck around here, lives around here in this surrounding square mile. And while I was standing there, I noticed, gee, this red osiers, also known as red bark dogwoods. They're bushes with thin red bark on them, long stems in the fall that whitetails love to feed on. They can live on them year-round. They like to eat the tender leaves all summer long, and the little green stems that they're attached to, they can mow the tops off these bushes or little trees or shrubs. And it's kind of a year-round treat for whitetails. But until then, I hadn't noticed that, it's kind of a little lowland area. There was an area in the middle there, it was kind of grassy, and there was water in there. Not deep water, but usually in the summer, in fall, it was about 6 inches of water in this little basin out in the middle. And gee, there were a lot of red osiers and tips of branches nipped off. And when they start feeding them on these things, our whitetails start eating browse at the beginning of the second week in November. After that, just overnight, all these little red osiers out in these kind of places where sunlight can reach the ground. Red osiers got to have sun. Well, it can be sparse timber, a few bigger trees, but lots of areas where the sun can reach the ground. we get in an area like that, you start out, gee, all these red osiers got ragged white tips on the ends of branches. And that's a very typical sign of whitetail browsing. You know, they can't just bite off a branch nice and neatly, because if you didn't realize it, they don't have upper front teeth, just lower front teeth. Lower front teeth come in contact with just a bare arch of bony tissue on the front. So they can't just nip it off clean. They grab a hold and kind of chew on it against that upper arch and rip it off finally. And when they rip it off, when they're feeding them on them, you can be in an area like that, and you're sitting there, and maybe eventually you start noticing every once in a while you hear a soft little, like something stepped on a real small little twig on the ground, little tiny snap, or kind of sound once in a while, and then you hear it again, only it's not in the same place, it's over this way or that. That's probably a deer feeding on browse. Well, anyway, one of the things I'm always looking for is red osiers where I am now. Where you want, you will have some kind of plants, even in Texas. That whitetail, you know, they're woody shrubs or trees, young trees, that whitetails like to feed on in the winter. And those ragged white tips are a tip-off. Now, if you were out there scouting in early fall, those tips won't be white. They'll be all dried up. They'll be black or brown, but they'll be ragged, you know. And on bush, they're a little harder to see with new branches growing all around where whitetail's been feeding on them, and the leaves above them. But if you look carefully, you say, gee, there's some ragged tips there, they're brown or black. Look around, there's some more over here. All of a sudden you start to realize, even if there's no deer signs there, okay, you can be out there, let's say you're out there in early September, and you're scouting, and you find lots of these bushes that whitetails like to feed on in the wintertime, with these ragged brown or black tips. But no sign whatsoever of any deer, no tracks, no fresh droppings, none of that. Well, those tips are there. Come November, when those whitetails suddenly start eating browse during winter, they're going to be there. Then there's going to be all kinds of tracks and droppings in that spot. That's going to be a favorite whitetail feeding area during your hunting season. All you need to do is find those kind of plants with those ragged tips on them. So anyway, that's something I'm always looking forward to. Well, like I say, in the spring, like right now here in Minnesota, tomorrow is May 1st. This is a great time for spring scouting before the wood ticks and mosquitoes and black flies get bad up in our northwoods. All those ragged tips on red osiers and some other plants, I'll mention those, but are there, and they look almost as white and ragged, just like whitetails just ate them. But these were eaten by whitetails last November and December. Late December, all the whitetails that live in my study area go somewhere else. Actually, they go two directions. Half or more of them go to the shores of a lake a few miles west of our hunting area. And the reason they go there is that lake is surrounded by boughs of white cedar trees. And they love, there's enough nutrition in white cedar boughs to sustain them, keep them healthy all winter. And so that's their winter, that margin around this lake in wintertime. Wolves love to chase them out in the ice, especially if there's not much snow on it. They fall down, they can't get up, and easy prey. But anyway, that's one area. The others go to a spruce bog. Freezes up in the winter, so you can walk around. Normally in the summer, it's covered with moss, the floor of the spruce bog, and whitetails can sink deep into that moss and there's water under them all summer long. But when it's frozen, they can walk anywhere and they get excellent cover from wind and snow in the winter. And they pick this spot because all around the outer margins of the spruce bog is lowland that's open so that lots of red osiers can grow there. Now, where there's a lot of white cedars grow, even with red osiers around edges of swamps and bogs, and even in swamps, elder swamps, where it's wet all the time, there'll be a lot of red osiers in there. If it's shady, like under lots of big cedar trees and other evergreens in the winter, around the edge, there'll be another plant, a small tree. They don't get to be very big because whitetails eat them down every winter, called mountain maples. They have gray bark. You're going to see pictures on. You're going to see them pretty soon. You're going to see red osiers, the way they look in the spring scouting. Red osiers in the summer, where just the leaves have been eaten off the top by whitetails. And you're going to see red osiers later in summer, where they're just black or brown tips. But you're going to see that. Well, you can see the same thing on these mountain maples growing in these lowlands. Mountain maples got to have wet feet. So do red osiers. They don't grow in highlands, especially where it gets dry and hot in the summer. They got to be down lowland. They got to have wet feet, wet roots. Anyway, you'll see a picture of some deer in deep shade under evergreen trees, and you'll see all these funny looking stems. They're all crooked, and knotty, from deer feeding on them all December and November, and those are mountain maples. And they grow maple roots just like other things. Well, deer feed on a lot of things. Like most of our favorite feeding areas are old clear cuts. We hunt in a national forest, and for about 20 years now, the kind of logging they've been doing in national forests in Minnesota is really neat for deer and grouse and other game. They're not like an 80-acre area, with square corners being made into a moonscape. Nowadays, they're irregular. It's like looking down, if you look up from the air, one of the new clear cuts, it looks almost like a lake with irregular shorelines, points, and islands of timber in the middle, and wide open areas, but nothing square, not like moonscape. And deer love these things. And sort of like in this diagram I have here on my chalkboard. Take a look at this. This is like one of my favorite whitetail feeding areas to hunt every year. Over here on right about here, there's a great big lonesome pine, a big white pine, and I call that my lonesome pine stand site. And have I seen some nice bucks from that stand site. But there's a little island here of timber. And you see little bays, like a lake here. Whitetails like to spend time down in little narrow places like that. And here, we always find a lot of fresh tracks and droppings of whitetails in this piece here. And sometimes here, and in years past here, and I've taken a buck in a narrow like this. I've learned one thing over the years. We have quite a few, some of our clear cuts are 30 years old. They aren't clear cuts anymore. They've been overtaken by timber. But it usually happens wherever there are places within these clear cuts, sizable areas, that are fairly open. And they've been favorite feeding areas of deer ever since the timber was cut to today. When I go up scouting in a couple weeks, or in about 10 days, I'm going to go see Lonesome Pine for sure and check out this area and around this island of timber. I want to see what's going on. Because when whitetails feed, they love these little narrows and these little bays like this, and over here and here. They love those. They don't love this one because my camp is right over here. But anyway, the last buck I took, it was right here when I took him. They like narrows, I think, because they're so close to heavy timber where they can outrace a wolf and jump over obstacles that slow wolves pursuing. They like to be close to escape areas when they're feeding. And so these kind of places have always been good. This area, now, there's some other things about clear cuts I should show you about. Like, for example, around a clear cut that's been in existence, whether it's a natural one that was created by humans, like maybe an old farm that was left behind and everything grew up, or it was a clear cut. But at any rate, a clear cut that's been visited by deer for 2 or 3 years or more will eventually have a perimeter trail all around the whole damn thing. It will be all in the timber. This one has a bog here, heavily timbered. But anyway, why is that perimeter trail there? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's say the wind is from the east. When a whitetail approaches a feeding area, let's say he approaches from here. Let's say he approaches from here. They always approach from downwind. And the reason they do that is a simple reason. They want to smell the air, all of the air currents carrying scent from the area where they're planning to feed. And if they smell a bear out there, or a wolf, or a pack of wolves, or a human out here, they know, I'm not going to feed there, I think I'll go over here. But one of the things, say it's safe, they figure, oh, it's safe, I don't smell anything. But before I walk out into this more open area, you're going to see a picture of what it looks like at Lonesome Pine. You'll see a picture there. I'm standing in a blind, a natural one, and the area is behind me over there. And you'll see it's kind of open, but it's loaded with red stuff, red boughs, or red azures growing all over, and also stumps of sugar maples, and sugar maples have red branches too, and all the stems growing out of the stumps of sugar maples are also favorite browse plants of whitetail. They love them. The buck I shot over here was feeding on sugar maple suckers coming out of the stump when I shot it. But anyway, when I get there, it seems all right, but I want to be sure about this because the air currents don't always go where you want them to. But they will follow these perimeter trails. They might go all the way up here. And they're sniffing air along the way. And they're getting the air from this area. So, oh, now it's okay. I think I'll go in there. They might go along here, and there's trails that connect to this island and check for air currents out in this area. And then finally they'll decide it's okay. Or they might go across here and check along here before they go out into in there to feed. So the perimeter trails are there for that reason. Another thing that finally happens is that there's deer trails coming, well-used ones, coming toward the feeding area from all kinds of directions. There's one over there, one over here. I know they're there, I've been there many times. There's some that come down here, there's some that go out this way. This way, they're entering, there's one that comes out this way. Well-used deer trails. They're like spokes of a wheel going toward the feeding area. So, now, today the wind might be from the west, or say, let's say it's from the east, here's the east. The deer will all be coming this way, toward the feeding area. And then they'll get on the perimeter trail and check, go each way, or one way, checking for the air currents before they go out there, 'cause they're exposed out here and they know it's dangerous because they're exposed. So they want to make sure it's okay before they go out there. Well, anyway, so it comes from downwind. Well, that's good thinking. A lot of hunters try to take advantage of that. Like, let's say you and I, well, we're gonna hunt this. This is a big old clear cut. How about if you go here? In fact, if the wind is anywhere from the east opening morning this year, I'm gonna be here, close to camp. 84-year-old guy, I'm closer to camp this year. But if it's from the east, that's where I'm gonna be, right there. 10 yards away from the edge of the timber in good natural cover. But anyway, at ground level. Well, let's say tomorrow the wind's from the east, from the south. Pretty common on opening weekend, where we on. Well, can you go back to the same stand site? Maybe. Well, if you go in here the next day from this side, and you, let's say here's the south wind blowing this way. Well, any deer that are over in this area that come toward this narrow to feed aren't going to smell you. The wind, your scent's going to be going downwind over this way, you see. So, that's not bad. But if the wind, let's say the wind is from the west, and that's the only stand site you got, so you say, well, maybe you'll be lucky and get there. Well, you won't be lucky, because deer coming from the south, they'll either move along here, and they're going to discover you, and they don't have to smell you to discover you. If you're up in a tree and your black silhouette as plain as it can be against that early morning sky getting bright, and you move a little bit, turning your head this way, they're going to get you every time. Big bucks, you'll never pull a big buck when you're doing that. So you want to be back in the cover here. You know, everybody wants to be right on the edge of a clear cut or a farm field to hunt, but you're so easily spotted there by deer out in the feeding area or deer coming to the feeding, especially from down, if it's from downwind. They look out there and say, oh, there's that dark silhouette against the sky, and it moves, you know. It's not a bird, it's not an owl, it's not a bear, it's a human. Okay, not only that, it's got fresh trail scent all along that trail. And deer walk along this trail, whoa, the one just went in there, and they know which direction you go. Their noses are that good. You went right over that way. So I don't want to be around here in that clear cut. So that would be bad. Well, let's say if that's your only one, only stand site, and you don't consider what your trail stand has been doing here, and every time you go there, that trail stand lasts 4 days. Every time you go there, you're adding more scent to that trail stand. It gets to be just like the airborne scent coming directly off your body and downwind. So they smell less, oh, I don't want to be anywhere around them. So, yeah, let's say here you are, you have just one stand site, let's say it's right here. And every time the wind is from, and you hunted here opening morning, then you think, well, the wind is still blowing from the east, so you hunted there, that was okay. Well, what's going to happen later that day, where you put in all your, you went back to camp, then you went for lunch, then you come back and you go to the stand site here, and you're downwind, you figure you're safe. But you aren't, because the deer that were feeding out here, they're coming from downwind. They always come from downwind. The older deer, maybe a fawn or yearling won't, but older deer will. They coming from downwind, the chances of them catching your scent, either trail scent or your airborne scent, is firmly established here now. That's why you don't see as many deer in the clear cut in the evening, because the deer coming from downwind catch you every time if you're downwind.
Okay, but what do you do in the afternoon? You know, it's all right to go in here in the morning because you're downwind and the deer are already out there. They were out there maybe 4:30, 4:45 already feeding, and so they won't smell you coming. Won't hear you either if you're quiet enough. But what about in the afternoon, Gee? When the deer come in there in the evening, if you're in the same place, they're going to smell you or see you every time. So that's why one of the main reasons you don't see deer feeding a lot in the evening during the hunting season, believe it or not. So a much better plan, let's say, gee, I want to hunt here. There were deer out there this morning, but I didn't get a shot. They weren't opening or something. They were way over there or something. A much better plan in the afternoon is come in from crosswind. Here's the wind coming from the east again in this picture. Come in from the crosswind. Go to a spot where your scent drifting downwind doesn't go into the feeding area at all. That's a better way to do it. You see, like this, and you come in, here's your scent trail. But in the afternoon, the deer aren't going to come in from there. They're going to come in from down here somewhere. They probably won't come in from there either, where you left your trail scent. That's good for 4 days, your trail scent is. And so you put some on when you went in, and when you went back for lunch, you added some more scent to that trail. It's getting pretty potent there already, so they won't come in there. They might come in over here or over here somewhere. But if you're sitting there, in this case, they're going to smell you. They might walk along this trail like this for a while to check this area over. That's what the perimeter trail is for. But if you're sitting there, they aren't going to get your trail scent or your downwind scent. So it's a good idea, wherever possible, always sit on a crosswind side of a clear cut rather than a downwind side in the afternoon. In fact, you could do it in the morning. You could go to the same stand site in the morning and same stand site in the afternoon, going crosswind, and never worry about tainting trails on the downwind side with your trail scent. You could go there in the morning and then you could go back there again in the afternoon, evening, because they aren't going to catch you over there. Crosswind hunting is a good idea, especially in the afternoon. One more point. What you might be thinking, you know, you're up there in deer camp and or hunting, and now that you know why, what could happen if you go back to the same stand site on the downwind side of a clear cut or feeding area, what can happen there? You might be thinking, well, I was there this morning, but if I wait long enough, you know, maybe the deer will be feeding by 3, 4 o'clock, and I go in later, I can get to the downwind side without the deer knowing it. Now there's two things that are a problem with that. One is, as the season progresses, older deer, especially like a big buck like you'd like to get, will begin feeding later and later in the day. By day 3, 4, 5, those big bucks are very unlikely to move from their beds until the last half hour of the day. So if you try to wait until that time, it'll probably be dark by the time you get to your stand site and you missed out on the afternoon hunt. In the afternoon, going later isn't going to help you. The other thing is that when whitetails come from the downwind and start feeding in a clear cut, like I mentioned earlier, they're moving into the wind generally. They might zigzag, go this way and that way and around, things like that while they're feeding. So the later you come here, morning or evening, the more likely it is by the time you get there, like say you didn't get there till 9 o'clock, those deer will be way over here somewhere. So you want to get there early, and then if you came there late in the afternoon, and they did manage to get there until after the deer had moved into the open in the clear cut, by the time you get there in the afternoon, they could be way over here somewhere. So in the afternoon, it's always better to go to a crosswind setup. Now here's another thing to remember. Now we got this periphery trail all the way around here. Well, there's another set of trails around the clear cut or a feeding area that's been there a long time, several years. There'd be well-developed trails, well used. They might not be currently used, but they're definitely deer trails that approach the clear cut like spokes around the wheel. They're coming in from all kinds of directions. So deer can always approach from downwind. It might not be downwind on this one particular day, but when it was downwind, they would use one of those other trails to get there. And whitetails can travel great distances from their bedding areas to make sure they get to a downwind side and use one of those trails, quiet trails. It's quiet for them like it would be for you and I to get there. So those trails can be kind of important too. And you know, here's a spoke trail right here. What I like to do, if possible, it isn't always possible, I wish it was, but I like to sit on the downwind side of one of those spoke trails. Fresh tracks in there, say fresh 4-inch tracks, they're big buck. Fresh tracks in the trail, fresh droppings. Sit downwind of it and have the periphery trail in front of me. That to me is more important than being right on the edge where you can see all over the place. And that's a double bad. When you're sitting right on the edge, your chances of being seen moving by deer in the clear cut are huge. When you're 10, 20 yards back in the timber, your odds of being seen are in your favor rather than the deer. What a stand site like that's 20 yards back in there with just natural openings, no big wide shooting lane, just natural openings, what we call shooting windows, to the area out here will not only give you more chances to take older deer, older, smarter bucks, for example, than one on the edge. And not only that, you probably will be able to use that same stand site with success next year and the year after that, as long as you don't overuse it. If you use it just once, maybe twice, maybe once on opening day and gee, you didn't see one and I know there's been a big buck here, maybe 5 days later, go out to your trail scent's all gone now, 5 days later. Go back out there again and use the same stand site as the wind is from that same direction, like in this case the east. And there's a good chance you'll finally see that big buck. My son John has been been lucky at doing that, going back to places like that 5 days later. He's taken several bucks, a couple of them on the wall here, by doing that. So that can work. But always have to think about what your trail scent's doing, wherever you stand hunt. You know, as a stand hunter, you have the advantage of, unless you shoot at a deer and miss it, you have the advantage of the fact that big bucks will stay in their ranges. They won't be gone right away like they are when you're still hunting or making drives. And so 5 days later, the buck is still around in there, if you're stand hunting properly. And so 5 days later could make all the difference, as long as that your trail scent isn't screwing it up in the meanwhile. So sometimes giving it that 4 days rest and going back on the 5th day can change the tables on these big bucks. But think of that, you know, if you can keep the peripheral trail between you and the edge, be 10 to 20 yards back in the timber and downwind in one of those spoke trails. Boy, that's a really good, fine setup. Works really good. The last one I can think of like that, I got a 12-pointer about 8:45 on opening morning, sitting at a place like that where I had the peripheral trail on one side of me and the spoke trail ahead of me. And that's what I kept my eye on, that spoke trail, because a lot of tracks of that big buck were found there while we were scouting. And second biggest buck I ever took, it's worth it if you can find a spot like that.
And I can move around with using a stool. I can use different directions and to approach from down, except one. When you go to a feeding area stand site, never cross it. Because a lot of times, like this buck here that I got here, he bedded. Let's see, he bedded. There's a trail that comes through over here, and he bedded here, where he could watch this. And if I walked across that during the spread, then 3 previous days that I hunted this clear cut, and he saw me walking here and I was leaving trail set, that would have ruined that narrows for 4 days or longer. If he was an older buck, he'd probably say, heck with this spot, I'm gonna go feed over here, or over here. So, anyway, never cross. I have crossed too many clear cuts during the day or night and ruined my chances of taking big bucks. And I did that again about 3 years ago. Big buck, missed a chance. Because he saw me going across it. And so, if I thought I had to cross this narrows and use a stand site on that side, because we had a west wind, rather than cross that, I'd go way over here and come around this way to get that. Now, how far away should you do that, you know? Let's say it's early morning and deer are already feeding. Now, I've talked about this before. You know, if your scent, airborne scent, reaches whitetails 200 yards or more away, yeah, they pretty much ignore your scent. You're too far away from them to worry about it. If they're feeding, they'll just look around and they'll start feeding again. They might be a little more alert now. Ears are listening for sounds of your footsteps, or nose sniffing and trying to make sure you aren't sneaking closer. And look around once in a while. But at any rate, 200 yards is safe distance. So I always like to think in those terms. If I have to detour to get to a site, I want to stay 200 yards away from the clear cut, or at least the area of the clear cut where I believe the bucket or whatever deer that are in the area are going to be feeding, before I turn directly toward my stand site and come at the stand site from downwind or crosswind. So 200 yards. 100 yards gets to be a little chance. If they smell you and they can say, oh, he's 100 yards away, or whatever they say, or maybe they'll say something like, he's 18 jumps away. You know, but they know you're close. Then they're going to be worried about you. Okay, maybe you're sneaking around here. They're going to be much more alert, and they're much more likely to identify any sounds you make. So try to be 200 yards away before you turn toward the stand site. Okay. Now, we talked about foods. I want to go back to that a little bit. One of the reasons that this is such a good place to hunt and Lonesome Pine, besides there being a lot of kind of woody shrubs or little trees that whitetails like to feed on beginning the second weekend, there's a lot of grasses out there, and clover, wild clover. That little grass and clover in the summertime, early fall, right up until almost like magic, the beginning of the second week in November. Now, they don't like all the grass. There's some grasses out there that grows in bunches, and it's white grass, and it's kind of stringy. It must be hard to chew. What they want is thin leaf grasses, thin grasses, like you see in your lawn. That's nice and sweet and easy to chew. Hay fields and alfalfa, those kind of things. Farm areas are great. Of course, cornfields and soybeans, other farm crops might be attracting them all the time as well. But after those crops are harvested and it's time for them to eat browse, well then you got to be looking for whatever kind of browse plants have those ragged white tips on them in the fall. And from that time on, you gotta be paying attention to that. So, but anyway, there's lots of the greens, the leaves, they eat leaves from a lot of trees. They like oak leaves and maple leaves, leaves from young, tender, growing saplings. Like they'll even eat oak leaves from little. We have a lot of shrubby red oaks in our hunting area, and they'll eat the stems off of those. Not only, all through November and December, little patches of them. But anyway, the foods are there, so that's important. It's a place, even if it's just browse area, you don't see much grass or other greens out there. It's a place to be serious about for establishing or picking stand sites if those white tips are over out there. But grasses and clover, those kind of things, those change. But bingo, come the second week in November, that changes. And so, if there's no good browse in there but a lot of grasses that they've been feeding on, come November, they might not feed there anymore. They're going to be feeding where they find the browse plants. So, now, that's what you're looking for. That's what I'm always looking for when I start scouting every year. Because it seems like every year I find one or two new places where whitetails have been feeding. I'll be out there scouting, looking for like those clumps of antler rubs and signs of feeding areas, and I'll find new ones. And some of the best ones I only found a couple of years ago. And holy cow, look at this. Now if you're out there in, like say in September, and deer have been feeding there a lot, one of the next signs I always look for, lots of tracks and droppings, fresh and old, off trail. They don't just feed along trail. When they're feeding, they're going off trail. If they're eating on red osiers and elder swamps, they're going every which way. There's no trails. If they're feeding on mountain maples and those heavy evergreens, lake shores or swamps or bogs, they can be going everywhere. Or maybe they'll be along these peripheral areas or the wet lowlands and big wet basins around, clear cuts, or old clear cuts. But anyway, where they're feeding now, that's important. If they're feeding there now in late September, they're finding all the greens they want in that area now. That's going to be a good place to hunt. Like here in Minnesota, firearm hunting season, the first few days of a hunting season usually begins first Saturday. Like say, this year I think it's going to start on 2nd of November. They're going to be eating greens then. And if there's those thin-bladed green grasses all around in this area, and there's tracks and droppings in there now, because that's what they're eating now, you can bet opening day this would be a darn good spot to hunt because of all those green grasses in that area. In the heavy timber up here, big tall trees, dead trees, won't find many green grass. There'd probably be enough there if whitetails were afraid to go out here, or they might decide, yeah, I don't like it here. There's another over here, standing guard there, another one over here. I'm going to go hunt in this clear cut that's way over here instead. So they can make a lot of changes quick. That's why my sons and I change stand sites every half day during the course of a firearm hunting season. So anyway, those are things you're looking for. Okay. All these things now. There's food that whitetails like to eat. A lot of kind of open areas out in the woods, if where the sun can reach the ground. Lots of tracks and droppings, fresh and old. More than any place else in the woods, with the exception of a limited bedding area. You find lots of tracks and droppings there too. But this is a big area, full of tracks and droppings, here and there. You can hardly take 3 steps in any direction, there's some more droppings. And look, they're shiny, they're fresh. And well, here's some older ones here. That means they were here much earlier, a couple of weeks maybe. And here they were again this morning or yesterday. They're feeding here now. hard to see what they're feeding on when they're feeding on grasses. But if all those tracks off trail, another thing is, when whitetails feed, they zigzag. They don't just walk in straight lines. They go this way, this way. The tracks are this way. They're going in all different directions. That's typical in a feeding area, even when they're eating browse. So just walking and moving from side to side, different like that. So those are all signs of feeding areas. Now, one thing about some feeding areas, like say when acorns are falling, whitetails love acorns so much, they're probably going to bed right where the acorns are falling for up to 2 weeks. And it's pretty hard to get anywhere close to the feeding area because the whitetails are bedded there where they're eating on those acorns. So keep that in mind. You want good cover and or intervening terrain to hide you when you're getting to a stand site at a feeding area when the acorns are falling. Well, it's a good rule almost every time, but especially true then. Okay, now you know all about the anatomy of a whitetail feeding area, all this stuff. And now, keep your eyes peeled for those things, and you're going to get to be better and better at finding feeding areas. Now, you've learned an awful lot about how to hunt that feeding area as well, where to hunt, and what you got to keep remembering about wind direction and moving. You got to get over the idea that you think they can't find you because you're up in a tree. Get over that. And the same thing if you're on the ground. They're going to find you soon. Now, the good thing is, the bad thing is when they find you and you're a stand hunter, is that even though when they find you, you're just sitting there. You're not walking around, changing direction, sneaking, looking around, listening. That's a dangerous hunter. That's a hunting bear, hunting wolf, hunting mountain lion. That's a hunting human. I don't want to be around here with this guy here. I'm not going to come back here for a long time after I find that guy here. But a stand hunter, that's different. The stand hunter's just sitting out there. He's not doing anything dangerous. But I don't like being too close to that. He's a human. And being a human, I want to live a long time. You know, older bucks and older, even older does understand that I don't want to be around this person very much, this human. So they're going to decide, even if you don't realize it's going on, I don't want to feed here anymore. Or I don't want to feed in this park anymore. I'll feed it over here. But they're going to go somewhere else. And so that's why you need to know where lots of feeding areas are. You know, in a square mile, there's usually about 4 or 5 doe home ranges, each one about 125 acres in size. And within every home range, almost every home range, there's more than one feeding area. A lot of them will have 4 or 5 different feeding areas. Might be narrow strips of elders full of red osiers, or narrow strips, little openings along swamps or bogs edges, or stream beds where there's green grasses growing that they like to feed on, or narrow strips in feeding areas, grasses, that kind of thing they like to feed on. So it's no big problem for them to say, well, today, let's see, the wind's from the south and there's hunters over there. I'm going to go over that feeding area today. That's where I'm going to go. And that happens all the time. And that doe probably won't take a chance on this feeding area again for 4 or more days, or until all your trail scents have worn away. It takes about that long. Or it's rained or snowed on your trail scents. Meanwhile, you can't just sit in one spot, because what you do is certain one way or another, sooner or later, usually sooner, that all the mature deer who live in this surrounding square mile are going to know you're there. and you're gonna have lousy hunting rest of the hunting season. Every time you move with the deer and where they are now, where they're feeding now, where you have no sense. You didn't lay any sense down during the previous 4 days. No sense there. It's like opening day all over again, where you go to hunt next. Like opening morning all over again. So, doesn't that sound like the way to hunt? So, but of course, that's number 2 part of all this is finding those fresh deer signs, the tracks are dropping that tell you where they are today, right now, and where the probable feeding areas are right now, or whether this doe that's feeding over this one is in estrus or in heat right now, and consequently, a big buck, the biggest buck living in a square mile, is with her right now. You see, but at least 90, maybe 95% of all the stand sites my sons and I are adjacent to feeding areas, and they're all 10 to 20 yards back in timber. They aren't next to the feeding area, with natural openings, windows which are small openings, or natural shooting lanes which are bigger openings, where you can see out into the feeding area and aim at deer. They're all there. So, now, you'll find all this information in detail, greater detail than I could give you here today in my new book, my 10th edition of my Whitetail Hunter's Almanac. So, if you need further information, you want to remember all this, go to that. It's going to be your hunting Bible. Really, it will. I've been selling hunting books since 1988, and all of them have been like that. People taking the deer camp. I hear these stories all the time. And they're checking, what would Dr. Nordberg do under these circumstances? Oh, here we go. And I got marks all over, but you're going to do that too. This book is more complete in that regard than any book I've written in all my years of doing whitetail research, beginning back in the early 1960s. So, anyway, think about that. But with this now, if you got this nailed, from now on, every year, you're going to be a much more successful whitetail hunter. Now, be sure, before I leave, I want to remind you, be sure to press that little red button down there that says subscribe. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. That way, you'll be told right away when I'm going to present another seminar. I've got another one, my next one, rattling around in my mind right now. And when I bring that one to you, I'm hopeful of having a normal voice again. I'll get that next Friday, hopefully. But at any rate, and that's going to be an important one too. You don't want to miss it. So, anyway, it's time to take a break. Go have a cup of coffee, think about all this, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries. And be sure to sign up for my email updates. Here you'll also find deer and bear hunting articles, my website bookstore, and much more.